Hey, welcome to the show, Leading and Growing Your Real Estate Business. This is Coach James Short, aka Shorty, and this is a show for those within the real estate industry wanting to lead and grow their real estate business. It's a series of interviews that we conduct for those within the industry. So we're finding out what those leaders are within the industry, what makes them tick, what's their story, what are their strategies, and how to become the leaders and the growers within the industry. But also, it's an interview series with those outside of the industry. I'm always a big believer of looking at a whole different part of the pie rather than just focusing on one part of the pie. Because what it does, it allows you to have a different perspective, allows you to get snippets or golden nuggets from those outside of the industry that can look into the industry and go, there's a different perspective. And so I encourage you to reach out to the guests. I encourage you to lean into these series to find out how can these pieces of information, experiences, stories help you lead and grow your real estate business. Hi, and welcome back to another edition. And we have a very, very exciting guest today, internationally guest all the way from Seattle, Palm Springs, and also Arizona, Merriah Harkins from Lucrim. Oh my goodness, she is a dynamic, tenacious senior sales executive with 25 years of demonstrated success driving sales growth, securing customer loyalty, and providing leadership in a highly competitive multi-channel markets. The company Lucrim is a real estate investment company based in Phoenix, Arizona. The leadership team has an experience across multiple property types ranging from single-family residential to multifamily, office, retail, industrial, and ground-up development. They specialize in the private lending industry and have a private investment offering available to accredited investors. Maria leads the Lucrim's growing sales organization and distribution efforts with a focus on expansion into independent broker dealers and RIA firms, continuing to grow Lucrim's success with family offices and mid to high net worth investors, and effectively marketing Lucrim's unique and successful private debt fund with expansion plan into development funds and other real estate opportunities. Oh, we're excited to have some fun today. So thank you so much for your time, Maria, and love to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So you've been in the game for a little while. What sparked you getting into the real estate world?
Yeah, so it's interesting. When I went to college, my grandfather was a senior executive in finance. And when I was a little girl, he told me that, you can get into probably banking or finance and you'd have less of a glass ceiling as a woman. And if you get into sales, there typically is no glass ceiling. So when I went to college, I studied finance, and I've been in financial services in different types of roles since that time. Um, I started out with the Vanguard Group, which is a big mutual fund company here in the United States. And I think they're probably pretty global as people being invested in
Yep.
that, and Charles Schwab. And I was really more on the service operation side. And in the early 2000s, I got into the sales side. I was promoted pretty quickly into managing sales organizations. And since the early 2000s, I have been helping alternative investment type firms raise money for their funds. So I've had experience working with venture capital and venture debt. I did a little oil and gas. So there's, a number of companies that raise money for oil and gas here in the United States. And then different types of real estate. So I just joined Lucrim in January, so January 2nd of this year. So it's been about 5 months. They have been really successful raising money directly from high net worth individuals who came directly to them, or they sought to grow that network by reaching out to those types of firms. My specialty in my experience in leading sales organizations has actually been selling investments through financial professionals. So there's a lot bigger economies of scale when you get registered investment advisors or broker dealers that have big sales forces to agree to offer your fund, because then you've got financial professionals talking to their investors about the investment, and then it helps you to raise money and helps us grow as a company.
Love it. And you would have seen some changes around that, particularly in the investment landscape and the investment portfolio with your history, with your expertise. What have you seen as some of those big changes across, I guess, because you've had different industry experience,
Yeah.
what have you seen as some of those big movers and shakers over those past years?
Well, the really interesting thing is diversification and the importance of it is real.
Mm,
So, I think we've all been through different market cycles internationally where there are different asset groupings or types of assets that are in favor, and then there are times where nothing's in favor. But if you have a diversified mix across lots of different asset classes and types, you are more protected from volatility. So like here in the United States with tariffs, being threatened and pulled back, we're seeing our stock market have major volatility, and volatility typically makes people very nervous. So investments that are not part of the stock market or the bond market, they're not in the traded market. They sit aside and they're like private funds, they're non-traded. They tend to provide a lot of stability. So if you can mix some of those into the, growth strategy you have, whether you're in the international markets or whether you're in the US stock market or bond market, a lot of people like having some stability that's not fluctuating when everything else is fluctuating. And I'd say we went through 2008,
yeah.
where the entire, it was probably pretty global, but here in the United States, we had that big bubble where everyone could get a loan for real estate, whether they qualified or they didn't. And then there was just a really giant correction that happened, especially in the real estate world. So what you typically look for is resilient type investments, but diversification is more important because it doesn't matter what asset class you're in. There are periods of time when you may experience ups and downs. And I would say for us, the Phoenix metro market here in the United States are some really high growth markets where they're really attracting a lot of international growth. So Phoenix has been known for really attracting, especially very large global technology companies that are coming in. And, the Phoenix market, it is a very large market, but we're in the middle of the desert.
True.
But, just multifamily developments, single family developments, all of this infrastructure and business that's coming in, there's a housing issue. And
Mm.
so they just keep building further and further and further out into the desert. So, it is a very pro-business state. And so, for people that are in real estate in markets like that, there's some more resilience in those types of markets than there are in some other markets that may be slowly growing. When you've got, a lot of business happening and continuing to grow, there's some real attractive opportunities. And Lucrum, what we do is the core business is to provide loans, and they're typically short term, 6 to 12 month loans to businesses and individuals that want to acquire real estate, or they want to improve real estate, or they want to develop real estate. And so they come to companies like Lucrum and, a lot of different private lenders that are across the world and across the United States where you can go to a bank for financing, but sometimes it takes a really long time to get through the process in order to get a loan. So if you have a short-term project or you want to act quickly on a piece of real estate, private lenders can act really quickly. And so a lot of times they'll come, it's a short-term loan, it bridges them until they can get long-term financing. But having real estate backing the loans that you're lending to high quality individuals and businesses, there's a lot of protection in that because if you're providing a loan and your loan to value is, let's just say, in the mid 50s, that means that if I'm loaning you, money for you to acquire $1 million property, and my loan to value is 52%, I'm giving you $520,000. The property is, the company, like Lucrim, stands in a first position. So we have $1 million property backing that $520,000 loan. And if something happens and the borrower can't pay their loan payments, you've got $1 million property that you're in a really good position. So, in private credit, there's lots of different ways you can invest in a fund that is very risky with very high loan to values, or you can invest in a fund that is lending to brand new companies. You can invest in very conservative investments where you've got low loan to value, short-term loans, um, and you've got a lot of protection in regard to it. So just lots of different ways that you can invest in real estate that way. And I think it's appealing to some that, are just maybe not ready to start doing it themselves, acquiring properties and kind of building that portfolio. And there's a lot of people that do that here. But it's just a really nice way to get some exposure to that type of asset class without taking a lot of risk and adding diversification to your overall investment strategy.
Hey guys, just a little side note here. How's it going? Are you on track this year? I know that sometimes this part of the year we can feel like we're in a bit of a grind, a bit of in the trenches. Are you on track from the original plans that you set out for the rest of this year? What I've realized is that with this time of year, we get so distracted and we've got trying to chase so many shiny balls and go down so many rabbit holes. And that's why I created a program called the 90. It's a framework that actually allows you to achieve more in 90 days than ever before. Some of the feedback that we've got from some of the people that have used the process, the 90, is that they've achieved more in 90 days than the whole previous year. So if you'd like to have the tools, have the techniques, have the framework on the 90, so you and your team can achieve more in 90 days than ever before. What it does, it impacts you of how to get clear, what you need to do, and who you need to be to show up in order to achieve the things you want to achieve over the next 90 days. Simply head over to jamesshort.com.au, click on join the waitlist, fill in your details, and one of the team members will be in touch and take you through the 90 framework. On with the show. 1,000%. And it's such a great piece of the puzzle to have someone like Lucrim to actually help you to that for that transition, and also that guidance as well. I mean, obviously, because Lucrim is across so many different facets within property and business and that finance space. What I've realized, and this may be true or not true, is there a flavor for Lucrim at the moment in relation to what are they seeing in relations to that funding? Is it more single residential development? Is it more the development side? What's been a stronger flavor of recent?
That's an interesting question. In the Phoenix marketplace itself, it's pretty robust in every different facet of real estate, whether people are developing, whether they are just going in and they're flipping. You see a lot of that where someone takes a
Mm.
bridge loan and they come in and they just fix a house up and 6 months later they sell it for a profit. So you see a lot of that. And then you see a lot of real estate that is being improved. So,
Right.
and a lot of what we're doing right now is residential multifamily. And I think it's just to meet the growth of the business growth because you've got to house those folks. So,
Yes.
let's just say an international chip maker comes into Phoenix and now they're going to hire 30,000 people and people move in order to take those jobs or get those jobs. You need to be able to house them. So, we're doing mostly residential right now, but we do have some commercial. The office space is kind of interesting in the United States because I don't know in regard to Australia, but since the pandemic, people got really used to working at home.
Yes.
So it's hard to get people to want to come back to work. And a lot of companies are making that happen. And when companies like Amazon, with their hundreds of thousands of employees decide everybody has to come back 5 days a week,
Oh.
then a lot of companies look for giant companies like that to lead that trend. And so,
Right.
the office the section of real estate that for office buildings has really suffered over the last couple of years. But I think in the next couple of years, that will still be pretty good. I think it's going to have a little bit of a resurrection as people decide that it's good for folks to be back in the office.
Very true. And yeah, we experienced it very similar is going into the big CBD cities, Sydney and Melbourne. They're like ghost towns, and now they're slowly coming back, and
Yeah,
businesses are wanting to go back. And but the commercial buildings, they were like ghost towns, and some
yeah,
actually did a transition from commercial into residential apartments and did,
right.
multi-million dollar fit outs and so forth. I mean,
Yeah,
and I guess then moving forward into the future, as the landscape changes within the US in relations to wanting a lot more manufacturing, and as you said, the business growth within Phoenix, is that? I mean, that's going to have a really impact on the residential market, as you said, with all these workers coming in for these business growth. This is a great opportunity for you guys in that
yeah,
front
it
end
is.
space. Where do
It
you see
is.
it actually going over the next couple of years? Is that's where the main focus, do you really think, is that business growth, which will support the residential growth?
Yeah, and I think too, as if the United States becomes, more manufacturing moves back to the United States. Now, the argument can be made that if you put tariffs on countries where it's not as attractive for the United States to move in and make their phones and,
Yeah.
all of the things that we import from China, there's a strong argument that is said that those companies will just move to other countries where it is less costly to import the goods versus moving it back to the United States. So it's an interesting um, thing that's happening here because even though you can make it less attractive to import from other countries, it doesn't mean that the companies here that import so much to do manufacturing overseas are going to come back to the United States because it's so expensive to
Yes.
make goods here.
So true.
It's so I think that's the interesting thing with real estate. So you can say office was so robust before the pandemic and no one expected the pandemic. Then all of those companies that, real estate investment trusts that were heavily invested in office buildings, if they weren't able to pivot to diversify, then, that puts you in a really difficult position. I think multifamily and residential is pretty protected. Retail too, you think about the Amazon effect and people shopping online, and the pandemic certainly didn't help because everybody shopped online, and then you get comfortable doing that. And then everybody has to feel like they have to follow Amazon's return flexibility. And so then you've got all these companies that make it free for you to try stuff on at home and return it. And so, I think the diversification, we have a diversified mix. I think the most resilient long term is probably housing and multifamily. But then you've got, these cycles with retail and with office, especially that just make diversification into a couple of different asset classes attractive versus putting all of your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, fantastic. Definitely, definitely. Now, let's talk leadership. You've had some amazing leadership roles over your career. What have you learnt as a leader within the business, and what is important to you when it comes to leadership and leading teams?
Yeah, so I have always felt, kind of take the Oreo approach, that you should, when people deserve to be complimented for a job good, when they do a great job or just in general. I think that's really important to give people a lot of positive feedback. I think just in the world that we live in, even when you think about reviews,
Mm,
people usually don't write reviews for things unless something goes wrong. And
true.
so you think about it, unless they have such a fantastic experience, they might write a positive review. But most of the time, people are compelled to write something when they're upset about something. And I think in leadership, not enough people compliment people. I don't think that they say thank you enough. I don't think they show their appreciation enough. I don't think they show people that they're doing a great job and talk about it. And when you do that a lot, and you're not doing it when it's not deserved, but then it makes giving constructive feedback better accepted. And so, that's the approach that I've always taken. I got some advice when I was first starting out. I worked at Charles Schwab, and I was very young. And I had a boss who was several levels ahead of me. And when she introduced me when I first started, she said, "This is Merriah, and she works as part of our team." And it wasn't like she reports to me, she made it so inclusive that I followed that for the rest of my career. That, I always try to be incredibly fair and I have very high expectations, but I think when you show people a lot of appreciation, they accept the constructive feedback better. And then when you make people feel like they're really included and they are really important to moving the organization forward, people just tend to really thrive in that type of environment versus it being like, well, so someone's here and you're here and someone's here and not making them feel that way, I think is really good.
That's beautiful. Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. That's so true. So true.
Yeah.
So, Mariah, on our show, we have our 60-second quiz to find out a little bit more about our guests. Are you
Okay.
willing to play?
I am.
All right, cool. Here we go. Favorite food?
Pizza.
Oh, yum. What type of pizza?
I like really thin crust pizza, and oddly, I just like plain pizza, just with cheese
Yum.
on it. I don't like all this stuff on it, but I love pizza.
Love
Yeah.
it. Favorite movie?
Gone with the Wind.
Beautiful.
I
Favorite
love that
holiday des
movie.
So good, so good. Favorite holiday destination?
And that's I was thinking about that just recently. I've traveled a lot. Travel is really important to me. I feel like you get one shot at living. You're here and then you're gone and you don't know when that's going to be. And so I've tried over the last 13 or so years to travel somewhere in the world I've not been. So I would say, I got married in Mallorca in Spain in a town called Dea, and it is so beautiful. And it's just one of the places that I absolutely love. I love Vietnam. I love Thailand, and I love Italy. So it's hard. It's hard
That's
to choose. I've been to so many different places, but I would say that I can't just pick one.
beautiful. That's a great answer. What's your morning routine? Do you have a morning routine?
My morning routine is pretty boring. I have to have coffee every single morning. Um, and I just get right to work. So I hardly ever eat breakfast, which, I wouldn't encourage your listeners to follow that rule. But my morning's pretty boring. I am not one of the people that get up early and go work out. I'll usually work out in the evening. So I stay up too late, and in the morning I just get right into it. So
Great. And so therefore evening routine. So you said work out, stay up late.
yeah, I really like to do power yoga. It's
Beautiful.
just, I really, or take a bike ride, just something in the evening, especially when you live in the desert. It's either you're doing stuff really early in the morning or you're waiting till the sun goes down because it's too hot during the day to go out and exercise. But I really enjoy that. It's a nice way to start the evening and then hopefully, a couple times a week spend some time with friends.
Beautiful. Do you have a most embarrassing moment?
I do. So when I was in the early parts of my career, I almost started a fund with a couple of gentlemen. It was in Silicon Valley in California, and we were going to a venture capital conference, and it was Christmas, and they had holly that was wrapped around the banister, and there were two women, and it was like 400 men and two women at this conference. And I didn't grab the banister because it had holly on it, and I tripped down the stairs, and all of my stuff flew everywhere. And of course, like only two women at this conference, and I made that kind of an entrance. So then everyone's standing around me saying, "Oh my gosh, can I help you?" And I was just so embarrassed. So I will always remember that. It doesn't matter. Use the banister when you're in high heels going down a marble staircase. So
That's a good
yeah.
one. That is a good one. Um, if you could have dinner with five inspirational people, they could be dead or alive, who would they be?
So, in regard to the United States, and I've been when presidents get together. Like, I just think it would be so cool to have dinner with Barack and Michelle Obama and then George Bush and his wife because they seem like they're such good friends, and they're Republican and they're Democrat. And I love that. I loved when there was the ability for Democrats and Republicans to get along, that it wasn't so politically polarizing. So I just think that would be fascinating. And then my grandmother died when I was 12, and I always feel like my life would have been so different had she lived. So if I would ever have an opportunity, she would absolutely be at the top of my list. And then those four, I think, would be the next in line.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
Do you have a biggest regret?
My biggest regret is not living overseas. So, I've had a lot of friends that have worked for big companies. I've always worked for smaller boutique firms. I have some friends that work for Starbucks and Amazon, and they've had the opportunity to live overseas for several years and, just travel around and have that opportunity. And I never did while working. Doesn't mean I'm not going to have that opportunity later on, maybe, in early retirement. But that's a big regret of mine is not having that experience.
Gotcha. If you were president for the day, what's one thing that you would change?
Well, if I was president for the day, I would try to create more harmony, both globally and in the United States. I feel like right now it is very dysfunctional and it's very polarizing. And I just feel like there are some big changes that need to be made, but there's diplomatic ways in which to do it in a kinder, gentler way while still getting what you want done. So I think that I would really focus on that, because I think our global partners are incredibly important to us, and treating our allies with respect. So that's where I would focus my efforts.
Wonderful. And what's your best piece of advice?
My best piece of advice is that you have to remember that life, as we know it today, maybe people believe in reincarnation and you're going to come back as a dog. I don't know. But like I do live my life feeling like I want to be kind and I want to be generous and I want to be fair. I want to travel so I can experience the world. I think learning different cultures, going to places where you are a minority is really critical, where not everybody speaks English and it's uncomfortable for you to get around. I feel like that just makes you a lot more understanding. It teaches you a lot about the world. It makes you more appreciative of what you have. And so I think just that kindness, generosity, really experiencing the world and different cultures, and just remembering that you don't know how long you have. So don't put off those great trips. If you plan the trips, they happen. If you're waiting for a good time to take the trip, you'll never take the trip. So I
Gotcha.
just, I plan my trips about 9 months in advance. Work can survive without you. And it makes you more interesting if you actually travel. You become a much more interesting person. And if you're in sales, you want to be interesting because then you can raise more money because people like interesting people. So.
Love it. Great analogy. Great analogy. How can the audience find out more, follow your journey and reach out?
Yeah, so we have a website and it's pretty good and you can get in contact with us that way. It's lucrum.com, so it's LUKROM.com. And then if folks wanted to reach out to me directly, my name is spelled a little different, so it's MERRIAH at lucrum.com. And I would
Wonderful.
welcome, anyone that has questions about just real estate investment, whether you do it yourself or you want to get into a fund or you just want to learn about different types of investment opportunities across, a wide spectrum. I've got a lot of experience with different types of asset classes as well.
Wonderful. Mariah, thank you so much for your time, energy, and expertise today. Really appreciate it. And it's great having you on the show.
Awesome. Thank you for the invite. It was really nice to meet you.